slowing down and making no time. I gotta keep it rolling. Those windshield wipers slapping out the tempo, playing perfect rhythm with the song on the radio. I gotta keep it rolling.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rideshare Rodeo podcast. This week's podcast guest is the one, the only John Lopez. If you are not familiar with John Lopez, you will be here shortly, so stay with us. John, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good, man.
Just
I'm
trying
good.
to mute myself here, and my phone does not let me mute.
Hmm.
Golly. And it's on your station here, too. What happened here? There we go. All right.
John has been on the podcast before. You guys might have seen him, you might not have. The last time did one, like a lot of good feedback on it. A lot of you guys were watching a lot more after play too, because people were like, I didn't recognize the name, but I was listening to you guys. Yeah, I mean, that's why I do these guys. So
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be back.
So before we get into the kind of nuts and bolts that I have down here and wherever else we might go, do you want to give us like a little John Lopez history?
Well, terrific. Good afternoon, all here in Chicagoland, Illinois, Algonquin to be precise. It's a little after 2 o'clock Central Time. I am John Lopez. I have been a resident of my community for over 30 years, and I have a passion for public policy and in the areas of mental health and labor issues. Some of that I get from my dad, some of that I get from personal experiences, but all in all, it's just by the grace of God, I'm later in life. I'm giving back to the community and more than just what was limited earlier in life. So
Yeah.
I'd like to believe that as I follow my calling and I'm very grounded with my faith, that I'm doing God's will in order to bring the agenda to be something that is reasonable. It's not about donkeys or elephants. It's about people, and it's about what's best for our country and for all of us. I do my best to be a consistent consensus builder where there are some areas where I take some very strong positions. And I like to also point out I've had some success. It's limited, but every small is like, remember how, like maybe in one of the Lord of the Rings movies, Galadriel will say, even the smallest of us give the biggest contributions. And that's I kind of follow that rule there. So
that was a dark horse quote, but okay.
I'm sorry.
I said that was a real dark horse quote. Like,
well, dark horse
out of
quote.
nowhere.
People have seen Lord of the Rings. It's been around 20 years.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying, just go on.
So either way, though, it's great to be back and look forward to having a great discussion. And there's certainly a lot going on here on October the 28th.
Yeah, for archive sake of 2024, and actually, what are we? We're 8 days out. 8 days out from this year's election. So crazy.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny. You were just talking about one of the things. So my first question I had down was last time you were on the podcast, we discussed about your passion for mental health, and you just brought that up. This time I wanted to ask you something I've been feeling anyway, and because you have that passion for it, because you follow that a little bit before we get into some of these other topics. What's your pulse on, I guess, the American people right now with the economy, inflation, political stress, nationwide divide, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do you feel the mental health of this country is doing?
It needs help, is what I'll say. I mean, it is a variety of different causes. It's not necessarily the left or the right or anything else in between. It's just a confluation of too many outside variables are impacting people's lives, and people are becoming more anxious. They're becoming more stressed. They're becoming overworked. And these are things that should not be happening. Let's just get a great example. Last month, there was a first of its kind hearing on Capitol Hill concerning American Health and Nutrition, a second opinion. It was co-hosted by Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., so it was a bipartisan co-host, and you had experts from across the country who are well known in not only the nutritional health but also the mental health sphere, particularly Dr. Chris Palmer, and they laid everything out there. And is it because of the foods we're eating? Is that contributing as well? You look at some of the medications that are being prescribed, even something that has become very popular, something like Ozempic, the saglamatudes, I think I said that right, saglamatudes medications. Yet I've been learning in my work in mental health that because one of our areas is substance abuse, is that, well, is it being prescribed for the correct indication with the correct diagnoses? Because, for instance, Ozempic, that's supposed to be for type 2 diabetes. But as I talk to people, well, it's not only type 2 diabetes who are being prescribed that. And that will bridge into a different area of mental health, more of substance abuse.
Yeah.
People are stressed. And there's new things now called Ozempic anxiety. That's a relatively newer phrase, was because people are stressed so much because they used to use comfort food as a coping mechanism. The medication takes that away.
Yeah.
So now they're finding, well, what are they going to do? And that's just a tip of the iceberg that I've seen. So it has been growing. Definitely legislation both here in Illinois and out of DC. We need more mental health professionals. There's a legislation was filed late this congressional term as far as applying a scholarship program at the federal level, because too many people are not, not enough people are going into mental health profession.
Yeah.
And so you're going to have a shortage of people, and there's more people in our country who need, obviously, you have even children who need to support the mental health space. So it's like a matter of starting earlier. This is like Congresswoman Salinas out of Oregon and a Congressman Molinaro out of New York. So it's got bipartisan support. And as soon as I heard about that, as soon as I saw the press release, I worked with resources here in Illinois. We got to get this on the radar screen. It's likely not going to pass this late in the 118th Congress. The 119th Congress will be seated in January. This has got to be at the top there, no matter who all is controlling Congress or who all's in the White House.
Yeah. I almost think and I know you're a big advocate for all of this, but I almost feel like you even understated what I've been feeling. Maybe it's because of this, but you're in one too. We're in that number one per capita. I don't want to use the wrong term here. We're supposed to call them newcomers. I don't do that. They're undocumented, I think, by that's been the wordage forever. So I'll use that. Mm-hmm. We have, a very undocumented problem. It gets a lot of titles. They want us now here in Denver to call them newcomers, but I won't play that game. But I hear all the things you're saying, and it makes me mad when I see all these other government programs that are just absolutely not needed at all. Not at all. And we're funding them. And it's like the thing you just hit on. Why isn't this being dealt with? And even once all of this undocumented issue goes, it never goes away. There's always a problem with it to some level, but this is out of control. And when this all gets dealt with and comes to whatever its resolution fruition is, people are going to need mental health.
Yes. And when you talk about undocumented, and I know lately your neck of the woods near Aurora, Colorado, has been the flashpoint. Well, if you may recall, 2 to 2.5 years ago, the flashpoint was El Paso, Texas.
Yeah.
And that's very near and dear to me because I have family roots into El Paso going back 160 years. And it's a matter of when I was reading, and I wrote about this back when I was writing for another publication, where people were saying, well, Governor Abbott is sending people across the country in bus loads. Well, what people didn't realize back then in mid 2022 to late 2022, it wasn't the governor of Texas that was sending the bulk. It was the city of El Paso. Their mayor, who happened to be a Democratic mayor, Mayor Leeser, it was a crisis. It's just similar to what you're seeing in Aurora. You had there was one report.
We were where the buses came to.
Exactly. Denver won, sadly. But Chicago got them, New York City. But it's like, you're the city of El Paso. You have unaccompanied children And one count said up to 4,000 unaccompanied children, and they had to be at least temporarily kept at Fort Bliss, the large Army military base there right outside El Paso, because El Paso was being completely overrun.
Yeah.
And finally, I remember fall 2 years ago, people were finally starting to acknowledge, oh, it's the city of El Paso sending us the most. Now that's changed in the intervening time to
Mhm.
where the state of Texas has taken most of that over, but you have municipalities, local governments, and I do have direct experience in local governments. And when you're faced with this literally at your doorstep, and you're right, the mental health, what's the trauma, what's the long-term effect, just like it was with the pandemic, what's the
Right. And this is
long-term
kind of
effect?
right backed up to it too. So
Yes,
even those long-term effects might not be felt yet. Might be
exactly.
pandemic and all of this and you snap in 5 years and you start walking into a wall or something, it's just,
Exactly.
I mean, it's really no joke. It concerns me a lot. Because I noticed people on edge. I thought that I was going to tell you one thing that gave me a little bit of hope about this, though, was that, I know what it was. So, one thing I got to say, since we talked about that's a hard subject, it needs a lot more attention, though. Um, One thing I've noticed that I really expected to be a lot different right now, and after the election, I don't by either side. But I'm really, I guess one side is kind of doing something abnormal, but um, I'm loving that this is not mudslinging season. I would have thought this was just going to be the worst speeches on both sides,
Mhm.
and I'm really not hearing it too much. So I mean, like, people aren't having the left right conversations in public, but there's not that. At least with me, there's not that feeling of hate. Maybe it's because my community is so all concerned with the undocumenteds
Mhm.
that we're all feeling as one like that.
I I think it's part of it's being it is good. It's not like the direct mudslinging. It's kind of different between a hot war and a cold war. Now it's been a little more subtle. So,
Mhm.
because for instance, we're hearing at the national level, what some will look at. Well, what about the bipartisan border deal that was struck between certain senators late last year into early this year? Well, the problem with that was the House had already passed legislation in early to mid 2023 called HR 2 Secure the Border Act. Sadly, it was a straight party line vote, yet the House was left out of those negotiations. So you got one side saying, well, they killed the bipartisan border deal. Well, you should read what's in the bipartisan border deal. It didn't end catch and release.
No.
Did not end catch and release. It did not put a cap. The cap was only on an emergency basis. I think it also put the DC Circuit Court, federal district court would be the only one that would be arbitrating. Um, it just left so much. It's just bad legislation. Now,
Yeah.
I understand it might be a compromise, but you see, one side could have easily done this of, well, rewrite HR 2 that passed from the House, apply what you put in there, pass the Senate, and then come to a House Senate conference committee, which is the way our government democracy is supposed to work, and get to a final policy solution.
Mhm.
And one side's accusing the other side's accusing the other, and hopefully once November 5th comes and goes and we see what it's going to look like, we'll get to actually solve the problem. Similarly with, obviously with labor legislation, and I've written about that more recently. But before we jump into that, though, I just wanted to cover that, though, is that public policy, it's either one or the other, and the other side's pointing fingers. So it may not be mudslinging, but we're still pointing fingers.
Yeah, I guess maybe another way to look at it's like, like we're moving into a much quicker technology space. Like we're not staying steady with technology. It's way surpassing us.
Hmm.
So we're like seeing people drift off. Like, I mean, you might as well just sew in the phone right to your hand now. Just
I hear.
so I mean, I guess I guess I'm pointing out maybe I'm making this a little dated. That's something that you understand, but maybe some viewers don't when I say mudslinging.
Understood. It's just more of, I mean, there's been enough mudslinging, and a lot of it's also by a gentleman wrote a really good article.
Oh, I'm not saying they're playing clean, guys.
Oh, I
No,
know that.
they
It's like,
they never play
but
clean.
a lot of it seems to have been outsourced. It's
Yeah, yeah,
outsourced to this
exactly. That's
army of
yeah, there you go. I like that.
influencers,
Yeah.
and it's on both sides of the aisle, both sides
Mhm,
of the political spectrum. And you're seeing this with, I mean, a gentleman wrote a really good article. I think he called it the influencer coalition or something like that, where you've got social media is so much a bigger deal now. It's been that way now since at least the mid 20 teens, is that you have social media influencers, and both political parties are using, like, for instance, the left has people out of like New Jersey, and I've seen some of these handles out there on X, and the same with the right. And some of them are, some of them have millions of followers, which that just shows how the influence of the media, even though some more well respected um, frontline journalists and writers, but people with better personalities and obviously marketing, and that's just success in a different way here in 2024, where they're the ones who are influencing the results. And we see this influence come through when the polls close next Tuesday. We'll find out. I
yeah,
mean, I remember 4 years ago when people thought, well, the House was going to be possibly flipped, not likely, but possibly. And
mhm,
then you had no Republican sitting incumbents lose their elections that year, even though the White House and the Senate flipped.
mhm.
And obviously there was also a big discussion began with, well, what happened with the polling? The polling seemed to have been wrong, and hope, well, that's been corrected. We'll learn next week.
But also yeah, also, John, we all have to remember that 2020, at the same time they were taking our ballots, they were also 6 months into, like, PUA and all that stuff because of the pandemic, and every system was broke in every state. It
Yes.
wasn't a matter of which states, every state was broke, and it was how long did it take to get back up? Some states took, like, 5, 6 months.
Yeah.
There were people because it was coded they were all coded in, like, COBOL in the '60s. So, like, they're going all these people are going, "Well, how do we do a workaround? What do you want us to do? We can't get into this stuff."
And there's
And I
probably
mean,
some.
I guess my point is, on top of, like, people saying there's corruption, ballot harvesting, any of that kind of stuff, I'm not accusing anybody of that. I'm just saying that whole year seemed like we were failing why did it take 6 months for you to just get a directory of the people in your state?
Yeah, you funny you mentioned COBOL. There's probably a large number of your audience who do not know what that is.
You know
COBOL.
what? And we're not gonna tell you, so you gotta
Yeah, there
go
we
look
go.
it up. Go Google it.
They can go Google it. COBOL is how it's spelled, though. So, but no, it's like I remember I was receiving notifications about unemployment and PUA, and I had not filed any claims. It was
Right.
totally
No, I'm
fraud.
just speaking in general, though.
No, I agree. I agree. I hear you. I
Yeah.
remember those days.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess that my point is, like, I also wonder on top of, like, a lot of the accusations that happened about ballot issues, I also wonder just how many were just literal the failures of that year in general.
Well, I know I've taken some of these into the public arena, some of it in my writing, some of it just in public appearances, even with our local election authority here in Illinois. Just to put everybody on the same page, our Secretary of State does not oversee elections. It's done through an appointed state board of elections. So I know most states it's through the Secretary of State. Illinois is not one of those states.
Right.
Now, within Illinois, you have local election authorities, which is for 102 counties, it's the county clerk, but eight, I'm sorry, six municipalities have their own election. Obviously, the city of Chicago Election Commission is the largest.
Mhm.
You have 108 total. So Kane County is my county of residence. So I took it there, and I honestly challenged people who were trying to say, well, what's going on with the ballot count? I said, well, look, is it really a concern about the ballot counting, or is it just a concern of you don't like the results?
Yeah.
And I asked discerning questions. Now, there were, I mean, I always would specify over 2 years of speaking out on this is that, well, look, you have irregularities. Every election has irregularities. Well, it's enough to impact the outcome. It's very rare when it impacts the outcome. Like, for instance, you might recall from 4 years ago, you had a congressional district that it took 94 days to determine the winner, and
Oh yeah.
that was upstate New York. Claudia Tenney was seeking election back to her seat. She had lost the in 2018, and it took 94 days to count the votes. And
Hmm.
there were everything that could have gone wrong with these 6 or 8 local election authorities up in New York State went wrong. The judges will even put that in, in the rulings. But finally, Tenney did win back her seat, and I know she's in another of a toss-up race this time around. But it's a matter of, you ask questions, you apply discernment,
Hmm.
and basically, I do challenge people. Is it really something that you think really went wrong, or is it just you don't like the results, what it told you?
Yeah, I mean, here both sides, especially one side, is preparing, especially the down ballot stuff.
Hmm.
Um, I'll just give the number again: 53,000 undocumented in the last 18 months here in Denver.
Hmm.
So there's already lawsuits being prepared that if anything under 30,000 difference is immediately going to be sued. So again, this is like a preemptive not liking the results, because if it falls in that margin, it might be due to that situation.
Got it. Wow. Well, like I say, that's we wish everyone well. We have to thank our local election authorities across the country, and to do everything to prepare for what we have. Our county clerk is in his 6th term here in Kane County, and he's the one who oversees the elections, and that's all through local control.
See, is he a good guy?
He is. He is.
Okay, see, let's leave that on a positive note then. There, guys, this isn't, I mean, it's human error happens every day. So there
Yeah.
is some human error in this stuff too. So when John said, "Do you just not like the election?" I was totally vibing with that, because I was thinking, yeah, I mean, for the most part, that's the only reason people ever even bring it up. Because if they
Yeah.
won, they're not going to talk about it. Even if it
Exactly.
was something against them, like, well, you did, they're not going to care. They're going to be like, whatever, we won. Let's go. So um so my second question is your recent article.
Yes.
Uh, do you want to share? Well, let me say just real quick. Hi, hey, chat. How you guys doing? What's up, Miko? Hey, Traveler. Hey, Ellen. Hey, Kevin Hawthorne. Hey, Ceci. And hey, anybody else who is watching or watching on the replay.
Hello,
But
and thank you for watching.
yeah, but do you want to talk about that article?
Yes,
And
by all means, let's do that.
okay,
Basically, it laid out, and you can see this on my X page under articles, and it's written under the title of my newsletter called Grace Notes. And I want to point out that it talks about the PRO Act, the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, and the fact that as is unacceptable in my honest opinion, for a variety of reasons. Obviously, the first area I talked about of the 8 parts was how independent contractors are treated. 1099 independent contractors. It uses the strict ABC test. We all saw what happened in California with AB5.
yeah,
And what is important to know, and yes, we know this is under the National Labor Relations Act. This is not about tax status. It's not about unemployment or anything like that. But to establish the strict ABC test in any federal labor law, in my opinion, is just, you cannot go there. It is too big of a risk for the tens of million, no matter whose numbers you use, whether it's Upwork 64 million or MBO Partners 72 million. It is too big of a risk for 1099s.
yeah.
Therefore, I suggested, as many have said, use what's known as the common law IRS test. Utilize that. It's about a 20-point question. In the article, I summarize those 20 points.
Which is not Bordello, right?
Yeah, correct. It is common law,
Right. Okay.
and Bordello is specific to California,
Oh,
and
it was. I didn't. Oh, I didn't know. I thought it was a more of a time period. Okay.
that's how I understand from listening to Karen
No,
Anderson and
I think you might be right. Yeah.
so when it comes to and you've talked to us a lot about on some of your podcasts, Steve, over the years, is over this past year, is that, well, even without an ABC test, an independent contractor can cross the line into doing a W-2 type of work, even under common law.
Right.
And that's where the hiring manager has to be very discerning, and where you need to use legal help in order to make the right decision that benefits the worker as well as your business. I mean, let me just give an example. In my own work on one of the local mental health boards, we have a 1099 independent contractor. We're a startup,
Mhm.
and instead of investing so much for a W-2, including all the benefits, we felt until we become mature, let's start with a 1099. And we hired them, and they are still doing great work. And when the time comes, based on what our board determines is the right time, not what the government, whether it's state or federal, we will apply and make that into a W-2 at the proper time.
So
And
the goal is to have that person be W-2. You're just making sure it's the right person.
not so much that, making sure, obviously you want the right
Or I
person.
mean the good fit. I know you even said they're doing a great job, all that, but like you don't want to like put somebody in a W-2 the first day and they suck, you know?
Well, no. The thing that I point out is startup. A
Right.
startup board has like a startup business. You have startup challenges. You don't
Mhm.
have any rules in place. And yes, you can work with your um, associations that obviously within Illinois, we have the Association of Community Mental Health Authorities of Illinois, and they have great resources, but every local mental health board is different.
Yeah.
And for the needs where I have been blessed to be the leader of the board now for a little over a year and a half, it's a matter of we're going to do what the voters will, but we're going to do it in a deliberative process that we're going to get over the startup. We're going to mature. And something we're utilizing is the capability maturity model for integration, which has been based off of the CMM that Carnegie Mellon developed back 40 years ago with the DoD. Let's do this deliberatively. Let's see what our written policies are. Let's become established and establish that we can complete our mission before we go into investing in W-2 workers. Because something that
Yes.
people have a fear, and whether it's justified or not, that it's just, especially in Illinois, which is known for some of its local governments, is that if you're going to be going too much with headcount and overhead, are you completing your mission? So
Right.
we're taking a slower approach, and we're seeing the fruits of that labor and then some. And when the time is right, we will make that conversion, and it's going to be a board decision.
Yeah.
Now, businesses in the private sector have that challenge too. I mean, you can think of any number of startups, and they even have startup manufacturing. For instance, they'll do like co-packing agreements. They have the intellectual knowledge comes from the entrepreneurs,
Mhm.
but they don't have the capital to purchase a machine, a factory, a floor, and all the capital and industrial equipment you're going to need. So a lot of that's outsourced. And until a startup becomes viable, let alone profitable,
Yeah.
give that choice to the entrepreneur. And if you have 1099s to start, then you have 1099s to start. Some businesses, some startups will go directly to W-2, and that's fine. That
Yeah.
should not be regulated out of Washington or out of a state capital. It needs to be regulated by let the people make their own decision.
Yeah.
Where they need help, seek help.
Or stop charging us for S corp and LLC filings and stuff because wouldn't it all be the same?
That's to a degree, depending on what state you're in. That's a good point too. But obviously, each state is different. So what we see sometimes, and I had this, I think when I alerted this discussion, it'll be 2 years ago this Friday on the 1st of November. I had this discussion with Congressman Bill Foster. He was seeking re-election in the 11th congressional district of Illinois. At the time, he was facing Catalina Lauf, and I was at a event, Chamber of Commerce in Crystal Lake, and I discussed, and I knew, listening to the spirit tell me, wait. I received a wait. Don't go right into it. So I let him talk, and he got to the point where he's talking about his successful business that him and his brother started up back in the late 70s. You might be familiar at EMC. Are you familiar with EMC?
What did it do? I don't know.
Lighting, lights. Theater lighting.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
I
Well,
mean, I might be. Maybe was it a name? Is that their
I'd have to look up what
abbreviation?
the
I
full
don't
name
know.
is, but they started that in the base in their bedroom, when he was a teenager, and
Hmm.
now he's into his late 60s. So when the unions came to him and said, "Well, we'd like to set up representation," he explained to us in the chamber meeting that day, "Well, we showed the unions that we're providing probably more than what you could provide through representation." And so the union stopped coming to them because they knew the workers were being better treated than what they could provide. And that's when I knew, okay, immediately, okay, that's the choice that every business wants.
Hmm.
It's not comes from the government. It
No.
comes from the businesses. And just like you showed, and I brought up the fact that under the Affordable Care Act, he was actually in Congress. He voted to approve it. It cost him his reelection bid back in 2010. He was elected back in 2012, has been there since. I even brought up, well, look what you just did with the Inflation Reduction Act. You passed an extension of the advanced premium tax credit that for certain 1099s, myself included, we can apply that discount so then healthcare is more affordable.
Hmm.
And you just did that.
Hmm.
And that if that's maybe an unexpected byproduct of the ACA, so be it.
Right.
But people are thriving and are able to pursue self-employment because they're no longer burdened. Well, I'm not going to be able to afford medical care, health care.
Yeah.
And I pointed that out. Now, sadly, it fell on deaf ears. He went ahead and co-sponsored the PRO Act under this version of contract of Congress after he was reelected 2 years ago. And he's facing a challenge right now by a different gentleman, another startup entrepreneur, a gentleman named Jerry Evans. But unfortunately, that seat is now rated a strong, safe Democrat. He's likely to win a ninth term um, next week. We'll see. Jerry's a great guy. I've known Jerry now for a little over 4 years, and it's a case where you have a millennial, but you have an established baby boomer. But yet, clearly, Mr. Foster, he's one of many co-sponsors of the PRO Act. Uh, all the House Democrats and I think 3 Republicans are co-sponsoring the current version of the PRO Act. So we pointed out independent contractors. Getting back to the original question, the ABC test has got to go and be replaced by the common law test, in my opinion. That's
Yeah.
just
Oh yeah.
suggestions.
I mean, did we learn nothing from California? I mean, I guess we didn't because they went and sold the California. I don't know how they did this. They went and sold the California AB5 experience as like snake oil all over the country. And people are like, oh, that sounds good. We'll take it. I'm like, what? Did
Well,
you
well,
look
let's
over
remember
there?
what happened. Remember back in January, Dr. Leah Palagashvili and 3 of her associates from Mercatus Center at George Mason University, they produced a study with empirical data that's saying this doesn't work. There are fewer jobs in California since AB5. Now you had 3 years at that time. Well, you're into the 4th year, and they showed with empirical data. Now, someone show me where did AB5 show me a study that says otherwise, and no one can. And
Mm-mm.
sadly, some of the court rulings that have happened with the strict ABC tests, and particularly the carve outs. We mentioned Olson versus California last time we were here. Unfortunately, that's gone
Mm-hmm.
against us, and
Yeah.
that's been something where carve outs. So right now, the courts have said it is legal for states to reclassify workers, even against their will, and provided you have the teeth to enforce it. Now, here in
I
Illinois,
wish the wording said it that way.
yeah, I
I
hear.
mean, if it needs to read that if that's really what they're doing, like even against your will.
Hmm. That's how that's what they're doing. And let's look at what happened here in Illinois. This Illinois seems to follow a lot of California's missteps, but this is one area that Illinois has not done that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an area where I mean, clearly the Illinois AFL-CIO, I know I mentioned this back in January. Well, they are still pushing for the strict ABC test. And that's when we had that roundtable in August of last year
Right.
with one of the most powerful Democrats, the chairman of the Illinois House Labor and Commerce Committee. He described his 1099 business, and Kim Cavan, who was on Zoom from New Jersey, saying, excuse me, you would be misclassified too. If California's rule was here in Illinois And we never say it was not an embellishment. You could hear a pin drop in that room.
Mhm.
And that's one of many reasons. I mean, one of our local state representatives here is a former 1099, and she has been very helpful. And we're still trying to stop this and maybe establish, well, what's the best way to deal with this from the state level. Because something that's happened, this is related to the article as well, is that I brought up back on September 23rd, Congresswoman Virginia Fox, who chairs the House Education and the Workforce Committee,
Mhm.
she went and set a subpoena to Acting Secretary Julie Sue of the Department of Labor. Show us the metrics of misclassification. Is this really a rampant problem, or is it just somebody's talking points? And I've been asking for similar data through proper channels here in Illinois most of this year, most of the past 9 to 10 months. And I still haven't gotten that, because here in Illinois, we only the construction industry is covered under employee classification or the Illinois Employee Classification Act, and it does not use the strict ABC test. We use a
So wait,
hybrid
I gotta pause you
ABCD.
there. Why isn't it just if it's only for them, why isn't it just an act for them?
Well, here in Illinois, it is enacted for
Right,
construction.
but the name sounded like a labor thing. Like they should just call it the Construction Act. Like no, let them know that that's all it is.
I
Like,
have
because
suggested
otherwise,
that
in time, they're going to use that against you and go, "Well, this is the Labor Act." No, that was for construction.
exactly, and actually, in my role as a policy consultant, that I have made that suggestion. It hasn't made it into an amendment form, but certainly something that if it's not in this session of the Illinois General Assembly, we'll be looking at that in the spring session that will start in mid-January here, because yes, it is for and you've heard many states. Many witnesses in Congress saying, well, the construction industry is a problem. You always hear NELP, National um, Employment Law Project, will say, well, the construction industry has so much. Well, Illinois, we've had that. But what I've been asking for is, okay, show me the metrics. Has Illinois enforced the law that's on the books now? How are
Mhm.
you going to go to a stricter test if you can't even prove you are enforcing the law right now?
Right.
And I'm still kind of like Congresswoman Fox in D.C., waiting for the Labor Department to give us the metrics. I'm still asking for that data here, and I've been asking for that for many months now.
Mhm. Yeah.
So it just shows you. So that was the first part, biggest part, because it impacts 1099s with all the app-based drivers, all the app-based businesses.
And Virginia Fox has been a help in that stuff too, because she's even helping this. It's still in its baby infancy, but there's a RICO case being built against Uber Eats. I'm
Mhm.
sure you're aware, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah, it's being built out of Las Vegas, and she's even like really trying to get that in the public eye. Because a couple of years back, I said none of these politicians, even the good ones, don't know anything about what we are or what we're doing. And by that, I mean, John, you fully understand independent contractorship. You know that I'm a traditional IC from doing lighting and production and things of that nature for 10 years prior to even Travis Kalanick's 2009 venture of Uber, which didn't get around the country till about 2013, 14.
Mhm.
So I didn't even see him participate in that till 2014. That's only 10 years now. So I've been back in that in the traditional space since like 97. Um, what I meant by don't understand it is they just think, yeah, but you guys are independent contractors. Yeah, just because all the TOSs say that and whatnot. But
Mhm.
I've always said, and I think you know this, John, like subclassify it, give it a hybrid status or something because it's still being formed. Like, don't affect all the Kim Cabins, the freelancers, the self-employed, the writers, and I'm not saying take down the gig economy
Mhm.
or the app-based platform gig economy. Let me be very specific. But I'm saying don't affect all the people who have been doing this for 60, 70 years.
Something that I have suggested, and whether this goes in legislation here in Illinois remains to be seen, is that, and I know this might cross a line into sectoral bargaining, but certainly industries, because that's how as you said earlier, that's how our law in Illinois right now, it's only the construction industry.
Right.
Everyone else uses the common law test. But in Illinois, okay, let's see the metrics. And that's why I've been saying, well, look, you got to show me what is the data say. The law's been on the books for 16 years, and show us how the enforcement has been. I want to know the numbers of causes of actions in the civil courts, because that's how it has to be pursued by the attorney general. And let's see what the results were. How many settlements, how many dismissals, how many actions were taken against companies. The real misclassification, that's something that when our friend Kim Cavan wrote an article about her experience with the Minnesota misclassification task force from last week, she knew she was over the target. See, nobody's sharing. I'm over a target here is that you can't get the information out, and even the legislators can't get the information out. I wonder if
Yeah.
the governor can get the information. Because obviously, the attorney general is a separate office from the governor, but that's the only place under the Illinois law where it can be enforced. And then you got people trying to talk up. Now that's kind of paused since 2019, trying to talk up. Well, let's go the California route. That's one thing we've not gone off the deep end here in Illinois is that California style AB5 has not been discussed any seriously for quite some time, at least 5 years.
Yeah. I just put that down there, you guys, because he just mentioned Kim, and Kim is both a friend of John and mine.
Yes.
And Kim, you guys know Kim. She's been on like 10 podcasts with me. Love Kim. Love having her on.
And since there's an
Oh.
Illinois connection with Kim, like I said, I don't mince words. Jedi Master. She said she wanted to have that talk with then
Obama.
former President Barack Obama. Of course, he's from Illinois. I said, okay, that's going to be like Mace Windu facing Darth Sidious and confronting him, and we'll see who's got the better lightsaber. Hi, Karen.
Hey, Karen. Another friend of the show. We love Karen Anderson as well.
Definitely
Thank you,
another Jedi Master herself.
Yeah. They let me in their wolf pack, guys, when you've heard that term. So I felt very welcomed by these.
And I'm still a
amazing
Padawan.
people.
I'm still a Padawan learner. So
Okay, so we got through all that.
but there's the other points.
Back to
Very
the article
briefly.
too.
In the article, I mean, I know this was the last point, but I'm going to say it here because Senator Mark Warner, he's one of the 3 Democratic caucus members of the U.S. Senate who would not co-sponsor the PRO Act, along with Senators Kirsten Sinema and Mark Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
He proposed legislation under Senate Bill 1696 for a pilot for flexible benefits for independent contractors. And he's been asking for that. Agreed. May the force be with all of us. And he's been asking for that. He's been working on that for years. I know him and Senator Todd Young out of Indiana. So bipartisan support, and it's got bipartisan support in the Senate. Any amended PRO Act without the ABC test should include Senator Warner's right. He said it publicly on May 3rd, 2021. So it's established history. We are not going to return to a 1980s economy. It's 2024. It's the mid 2020s. We're 40 years into that, away from that. And I remember the first articles back in the late 80s about the leasing of employees through independent contracting. So since benefits has been something that some elements of the left have said is an entitlement, well, let's provide 1099s an ability to receive benefits. And this pilot program is something that should at least be looked at, let alone put into as a pilot to see how it works. So Senator Warner has made clear he is not going to vote for the PRO Act as is. So even if, and this, I know it's a long shot for the Democrats to retain the Senate after next week for the 119th Congress, you have to remember both Warner and Kelly will be in the Senate. So even if the Democrats retain the slimmest of majorities, 50+1, you have 2 senators who are already on record that they're not co-sponsoring the PRO Act as is.
Right.
And clearly Warner wants flexible employee, and both have talked about independent contracting. Both Kelly and Warner. And obviously Sinema is retiring. She's not going to be there next time. But so even if the Democrats retain the Senate, they got to have at least 53 seats in order to pass the PRO Act.
Yeah.
As is.
But on your keywords, as is, because Karen has said, even Kim multiple times has said, well, no, I mean, the PRO Act's kind of dead. We've talked about they tried to shuffle it through in pieces. Let's just keep shoving pieces through, see what sticks, and then try and reassemble it on the other, all these different ideas, but it feels like it is in pieces. But that doesn't mean it can't come back together as something different that would work.
Especially
and again, we don't want it to work.
Especially in a new session of Congress where everything starts from scratch, everything starts over, the 119th Congress. And like I said, right now, conventional wisdom, as of a week out, is that the Republicans are going to flip the Senate and the Democrats are going to flip the House. Whether that happens remains to be seen. It
Yep.
all comes down to battleground states for the Senate and battleground House districts across the country, which are not necessarily the same as the states for the Senate, let alone the presidency.
Yeah.
So what happens there is that with the support, with the PRO Act, will likely come back in another form. And we just have to be vigilant, be on our guard, as Kim would say, and she said this there at the workshop in Illinois last year. We have to be vigilant. We have to be participating. We have to be invited. And fortunately, like I said, I've got a good state representative who is inviting us, and she was the one who put this together and had the chairman of the Labor and Commerce Committee in person to discuss this. And there, and like I said, I remember I forewarning folks, I didn't use the term Jedi Master, but I said, well, look, when you're working with Kim, she really is discernment.
Yeah.
And that, and something else, and I see Karen's message there is something else that could rear its head. And I did mention this in the article. Remember something 4 years ago, the House Democrats, who were in the majority at the time, tried to put the ABC test under the Fair Labor Standards Act. They actually tried they actually had legislation drafted to do that. So we have to be vigilant. Anywhere in federal labor law, if the ABC test is used, the first time it gets in there, it establishes a legislative precedent, which we should fight peacefully, diplomatically, and working within the system to ensure that does not happen. Obviously, both Karen and Kim have shown how that works, and others have too. And by all means, that's where we all have to be vigilant. And those of us have a little more bandwidth, especially my line of work is policy consulting. That is something that I know Mike Ruby out of Massachusetts is also another Jedi master in this as well.
And that's the thing, you guys, like, you're hearing a bunch of names that you've seen on here. Know that on Twitter, we're all chatting and we all interconnect. So like, we
Yes.
all know each other. So it's good because John has all these powers. Kim has all these powers. I have a reach and other things I can do. And like, to come together from across the country, pretty amazing stuff.
And that is, a lot of people have been talking about the importance of the grassroots on both sides. Well, and I definitely in several of my Facebook posts, I'll refer to Kim, Cavan, and many others as their grassroots on steroids. They're grassroots on steroids. I mean, with the book that Karen Anderson and Freelancers Against AB5 put together,
Yeah.
to where having to be plaintiffs in litigation, that's grassroots on steroids. And when you testify before Congress, that is a verification that you're doing something right. It's not just about counting votes on election day. It's about making a difference with public policy and getting the word out. And that's why I applaud all of them. And
Right.
like I say, getting to the other points, we can cover them briefly. The franchises. Remember the joint employer rule. The joint employer rule was struck down in the courts. That's still in the PRO Act. So if the courts have already ruled on the joint employer standard that the left is trying to establish with franchise, basically making workers for a franchisee also employees of the franchisor. So think of John Lopez Burger King restaurants and also employees of Burger King itself. That is just unsustainable from a control standpoint. That's what the court said. And I did point out the National Labor Relations Board, they try to do this part of the PRO Act by executive fiat through the Biden-Harris National Labor Relations Board. Well, the National Labor Relations Board was wrong, and they withdrew their appeal of the district court ruling on July 19th. But we also saw a taste of Congress acting under the Congressional Review Act. They passed the House Joint Resolution 98 back in mid-January. It had bipartisan support. And then the Senate actually passed it with Senator Manchin switching over and voting with the Republicans. President Biden vetoed that, but it was after the fact of the district court ruling in Texas. So that should not be anywhere. It's already been ruled unconstitutional. That should not be anywhere in the PRO Act. So our franchise friends can also work with us to stop that too.
Yeah, I somebody that joined us, I want to point this out because even Oscar, I don't think you know this, but or maybe you do, but John is from Chicago, as are you. So you guys are both Chicago. I just wanted to say hi. So,
Hello,
but
hello. I like his Star Trek reference there, IB Borg.
E-
So
no,
that's
it's a woman from Brazil that lives in Chicago.
got it.
It's Ivanaska.
Okay, very nice.
um,
Okay, the other components I mentioned NLRB. Another amendment I suggested. There is legislation right now, Senate Bill 991, which would reform the National Labor Relations Board. You shouldn't have a different NLRB just because the administration changes. It makes it an equal board. It has more uh, proactive judicial review of rulings before you try to implement those rules. And it's just some good common sense. I think, I believe it was Senator Marsha Blackburn. Um, it was Marsha Blackburn who also said it was the sponsor of this. It doesn't have bipartisan support yet, but it's a common sense thing to where the NLRB has got to work the way it's meant to work based on the National Labor Relations Act of 1935. Right now, it's
mhm.
too politicized. It's hyper politics.
Yeah,
So that's another suggested amendment.
yeah,
Another suggested amendment I just briefly touched upon: card check. Card check is allowing votes to be taken outside of a secret ballot, usually on a tablet. Now that's been around for quite some time. The technology may not have been, but that's not new. But something with unions, with the storied histories of unions in this country, is coercion.
right.
Coercion of intimidating people to say, you do this to keep your job. If you want to work, you got to do this. That should not be, and just like political violence, that should not be anywhere in our nation. So keep
What
secret
he just
out.
described to the gig app platform workers is also known as DoorDash. So
Okay.
go ahead.
And appreciate that there. But another significant component is right to work states. There are 26 right to work states plus the territory of Guam
Correct.
that have chosen under Taft-Hartley, the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947, to be right to work and put protections for workers from potential union coercion.
Right.
And these tests, it's in 26 states. And I also pointed out, well, the states, this is a state decision. This is democracy. People start to talk about defending democracy. Well, let's defend democracy. The state of Michigan, through elections and at the ballot box, elected the legislative and executive leaders to overturn their right to work law. I may not agree with it, but that was their doing. They did it based on the ballot box.
And that's my state, guys.
Yeah,
I got
and
my
so
Detroit on. I'm born and raised there. You guys know I'm in Colorado, but
and state of Tennessee, they did the other way. They enshrined right to work into their constitution in the 2022 election. Here in Illinois, the Workers' Rights Amendment, I tried to fight it, but it did pass. It didn't pass outright. What that means is that to pass outright in Illinois, a constitutional amendment has to receive 60% of the votes cast.
okay.
That did not happen. I think it only got 58%. But there's another mechanism which allows for approval of a constitutional amendment if 50% of the ballots cast say yes. And that's how it was passed in Illinois. So we are no longer can have right to work laws implemented because the state constitution is against that. So that's another one. So all these different changes, I know we're running up on time here.
No, I
And
was
the others,
looking. I'm just looking ahead a little bit. Go ahead. Go
and
ahead.
the other changes can be seen in the article. But I've hit the big ones
Right.
between the joint employer, especially the ABC test being replaced, and certainly right to work states, and the Senator Warner's bill concerning the flexible pilot program. I mean, another great champion for us. She works now for the Independent Women's Forum, Gabriella Hoffman.
Hmm.
She provided testimony before Congress back in April about portable benefits. And her testimony, I left a link to her queued YouTube video, because it is solid. She definitely touches upon the ABC test, and as she put it, the hubris of people trying to establish that. But the odd thing about that hearing, that Congressman Kiley, as chair of the Workforce Protection Subcommittee, was stated, nobody brought up the Warner bill. he mentioned it at the very end in the chairman's closing remark, but nobody, not even the minority, the Democrats, brought up, hey, there's the Portable Flexible Benefits Act for a pilot act. Nobody brought that up. And the odd thing is the House sponsor happens to be the chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, Suzanne Delbene, out of, I believe she's out of Oregon. No, she's out of Washington, one of the states. She's out of Pacific Northwest. Nobody
One
brought
of
that
those
up.
states.
Nobody brought that up. So that's where, if it does come back, and I think it will, because I think we're
Mhm.
going to have a divided government after next week. Just which way we don't
That's
know.
what I was also alluding to when I was saying it wasn't as much mudslinging earlier.
Yeah.
And we kind of clarified what I meant there, because I mean there still is, but that's what I was saying. It's all going to be after.
Yes.
It's going to be like what normally is pre is going to look horrible after, regardless. Doesn't matter.
No, and then you're going to see the people jockeying. If like I said, if the House flips and the Senate flips, you're going to see new chairmanships come in, and then you're going to have, a jockeying for who's going to be certain committee chairs, obviously ranking members for the minority. And then, though, you can guess what's going to come back in some form in the 119th Congress. That's a given.
So this is kind of I think I know the answer to this, and I talked to this person often. I've had him on the podcast. This is kind of an odd question because, John, you got to go with this, because I feel like I've given this an opinion many times.
Okay.
This is Ron from Massachusetts, by the way.
Okay.
Is there any reality to a federal law that sets a minimum wage for delivery drivers? See, like,
Okay.
now we're talking about not being, I mean, yeah.
Now we're talking about the Fair Labor Standards Act, because that is the law that the federal law, the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. It's got four primary areas for enforcement. Minimum wage is one of them. So if an app-based driver is covered under the Fair Labor Standards Act, then there is a minimum wage. It's based on whether it's the federal minimum wage or that of the prevailing state. So for instance, in Illinois, we have a minimum wage of $14 an hour, whereas the federal minimum wage is $7.25.
Mhm.
States can make it better for the worker, but they can't have a sub-federal minimum wage, if you will.
And
So to answer that question, if the Fair Labor Standards Act applies, then there is a minimum wage.
And so this is why, but this is what I always say about it. And Ron, this will resonate with you. I always say that, and we just said it earlier, there needs to be a hybrid for the app-based gig economy. It needs to have its own rules and discussions and everything. It is it's somewhat independent contractor, but along the way, it's a little diluted, and it needs to be separated from the rest, so that the Karen Andersons and Kim Cavins can go about their day while we figure all this out.
And that's something that you bring up the point, because that also gets to the independent contractor rule that the Department of Labor implemented back on March 11th. That it's about the Fair Labor Standards Act. Now, I know there is a little confusion. Does that automatically classify you as a W-2? As I understand and I'll say up front, I'm no lawyer. I don't have any legal training.
Karen.
But
it's not what I meant, by the way. I meant something more like
I know you're not
meaty.
talking vehicles, but when I see the Fair Labor Standards Act, and I had to research this because I mentioned earlier about our local mental health board, 4 areas: a minimum wage, child labor, overtime, and records. That's the base area. I had to read the Fair Labor Standards Act in order to know that our independent contractor was not going to be reclassified under anything based on what the feds say. But in order to preempt myself and our board, I had to ensure, well, just in case somebody does do that, are we in compliance anyway? Some might call this cover my backside, or just simply being proactive.
Mm-hmm.
If we get to that bridge and have to cross it, we will cross it, if the bridge comes at all.
Yeah.
Now, here, for instance, local government boards, I know I shared this, I think, in Facebook, when we passed our version in Illinois, the Freelancing Isn't Free Act. here is the Freelance Worker Protection Act. When that became law back on July 1st, it was very clear local governments were exempted from having to comply with the new law.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't affect my work on the mental health board because it didn't apply to us.
Okay.
Now, let's look at other rules the Department of Labor has. The overtime rule. We had a new overtime rule implemented back on July 1st, and there's going to be another change on January 1st. And fortunately, at our unit of government, it was very clear, unless you're an elected official, there's no exposure.
Mm-hmm.
Our local county government, I asked the question, well, we did do the review. And I had to ask, well, did you do the review before July 1st? And the answer was no. Okay, that's me more of a reactive state, but you have to be proactive, and that's up to the elected officials how they get the notice. You know, once it's applied to the National Registry of Rules that are coming, that should be an immediate downbeat to where you do your impact analysis. But this one of the board members here at our county board was very clear. This is going to impact a lot of local businesses because he's already hearing from them. I said, well, that's federal. And I agree with Karen on the freelance. I fought that too. My state representative was one of the 2 House Democrats here in Illinois. They're in a supermajority. She was one of the 2 that voted against it.
Mm-hmm. So, my question 3, I think we just covered it in full. In fact, it was, in your opinion, what is the current trajectory of independent contractors in this country? And then I had a follow-up to that was, do you think that when all this shakes out, we are looking at a nationwide PRO Act, state-by-state decisions on how ISCs will be affected, or something completely different? But I think we just covered all that. So I do have one last question.
Okay.
And here's the thing, guys. I'm trying to do these last questions on the podcast where I make it something random, like for the specific guest. Like it should be for John. And I haven't yet reused one, but I'm gonna. If you could have 30 minutes, you're getting the same one as Kevin. If you could have 30 minutes one-on-one conversation with anyone regarding the future of independent contractor in America, who would it be and why?
It would be Governor J.B. Pritzker of Illinois.
Okay.
And it is because we've already laid the groundwork. This is what we're doing. You can prevent what happened in California by some of the simple amendments that we've talked about at the Independent Contractor Roundtable of 2023. And you can say, in all honesty and sincerity, no law that you signed caused the ports to close or caused the supply chain to be disrupted. Gavin Newsom can't say that. Governor Gavin Newsom of California. Governor Pritzker has it in his powers, and he's still a governor here until 2026. Whether he seeks a 3rd term remains to be seen. He has the power to do something that break away from the pack, impact more lives positively, and stand firm for the working families and all workers, union and non-union alike.
So you say he has that trajectory or that potential to break away. Are you also basing that decision of who to have that conversation with on that you think that he actually could be not necessarily for sure persuaded, but actually is open-minded enough to hear it? And
I think he's open-minded to hear it. Now, whether he's open-minded to implement it, that's up to him.
Right. I mean, that's the point of this question. I mean,
and that's where
the people like you and Kim are picking tough people. You're not picking people that you just want to talk with, and you're not picking people who are going to go, yeah, it's a great idea, let's implement it.
Well, it's a matter of Governor Pritzker was saying something quite a bit throughout the pandemic. Trust the science.
Mm-hmm.
To extend that and apply it, you also have to trust the data.
100%.
Right now, I have not seen anything that says a California AB 5 law will increase the economic opportunity for all workers. You're not even seeing it for union workers.
No, plus they've had 4 years.
Exactly. You've got 4 years. So because keep something in mind, it's not a secret that Governor Pritzker has presidential ambitions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whatever happens next week will determine when does that plan get put into effect. There's rumors he might actually run for the Senate should Senator Durbin, whose term is up in 2 years, and he's getting into his early 80s, there's room he might run for Senate and forego a third gubernatorial term.
Mhm.
That means he'd be taking us to Washington if he was to run. Illinois is a very blue state, so it's likely he could win that. But the point, though, is that, as you said in an intro about me back in late January, Steve, I am a behind the scenes person, and it's a matter of how I've been prepared has taken on many different roles. Like I said, I did not expect to be going to Milwaukee during the convention at Fiserv Forum. It opened up for me through my independent contracting work for a congressional candidate in Florida. So I was a guest.
Plus it's only a 2-hour drive.
That's a big part of it there. But the point, though, is that I did not expect to be there. That was not on my bucket list.
Right, of course. I
As
didn't
God
expect
opened
you
up
would.
things, and all the people I talked to, and you don't, and this is where I'm thankful for all my paying attention to social media and C-SPAN. I didn't have to be introduced. I recognized whom some of these members of Congress are. I had a lot of solid conversations. Sadly, not all of them, because some of them were in passing, but
Mhm.
still, some of the ones I remember specifically, two of them serve on the Workforce Protection Subcommittee. First one being Congressman Nathaniel Moran out of Texas, out of Tyler. And it's one of those things where I didn't bring my wireless phone charger. I had to be by a plug by the concession area. And I saw a familiar face. Oh, Senator Congressman Moran. And I established a connection, falling back to my salesmanship days. Well, we used to own a farm up in Upshur County. He knew exactly where that was. Then I mentioned about the PRO Act. I said, I thank you for all your work, because he was one who's been helping Congressman Kiley. He's a fellow freshman. Also, that was the week where one of the House Republicans defected to the dark side, since we've been using the Star Wars metaphors. And that's when Lori Chavez DeRemer out of Oregon 5 co-sponsored the PRO Act back on July 15th. I mentioned I had to be the bearer of bad news. He didn't know that. But we shared, keep up the great fight. And he said, we will. And then the other one that really stands out to me is Congressman Glenn Grothman out of Wisconsin. Of course, Wisconsin was the host for the Republican National Convention.
Mhm.
And we shared, he gave us it was like, he's a Midwesterner, but he talks like a Texan, because he will shoot the breeze with you about policy. And we were talking about, well, how can we get more people to know what are the full impacts of something like the PRO Act? And he was shaking his head as much as we were, because he's that thorough. He knows the dangers. He's been talking to business groups up in his district in Wisconsin. And of course, Wisconsin's a right to work state as well.
Mhm.
So those conversations, and I had other conversations with other members, a lot of them varied, but I knew who they were. And again, I had no idea I was going to be in Milwaukee in mid-July, yet I was there, and I've been preparing for a journey where it's going to take me. God only knows where it will. But, I've since the first of the year, my life's being transformed, coming on to podcasts like yours, Steve. And I do thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, I'd love
Whereas
to have you.
this is part of a larger tapestry of a life plan, which I don't know the answer. I just know I need to trust the Almighty to see where I'm going to go. He's been preparing me. My physical body has changed significantly since the first of the year.
I was gonna congratulate you on that
Oh,
too,
thank
because
you.
I mean, I can't remember I want to say iFit, but I know that's wrong. What is it? Because you probably want to give them a prop, right? Because it worked.
Well, it definitely worked. It's called CFIT, SIEFIT. That stands for Spiritual, Intellectual, Emotional Fitness. It's a startup business that started back during the pandemic of 2020. It started out primarily for helping women with nutritional counseling and exercise. It was expanded to men in early to mid 2023. I started the program in 2024, and by the grace of God, I've lost 67 pounds since January 1st.
Congratulations, man.
Thank you. And thank you. And not to minimize that, though, my latest set of goals, I just did a 6 weeks where my nutritional trainer, okay, Mark, you got to stop losing weight. I'm losing too much. I'm losing too much. So
He's having to buy new clothes every month.
well, like for instance, this shirt, I had tailors at a local clothier saying, we want you to get to a 15. This is a size 15 that I was able to purchase
Wow.
last month. And they go, what I tell them is that, look, it's a matter of, I know nutrition is 100% is 90% of this plan. And that gets back to what was held back with the Senator Johnson and RFK hearing last month in Washington about nutrition and about mental health. Because you notice the word in there, emotional fitness. That plays a big part in this too. And by the grace of God, I was able to find this. And my trainer would be pleased. He's been out of town lately, but look, I kept the weight steady for 6 weeks. I kept the weight steady, and then by the grace of God, I've actually increased my lean muscle mass. It's like I reduced the fat percentage by about a little over 2 percentage points.
Yeah.
And that translates to a 4 pound, a little over 4 pounds lean muscle mass. And he said, that was my goal. That's my new goal now, because I'm really not at a point where I can be losing
Damn,
1
not only
pound.
you lost all that weight, but you're at 4%.
I'm sorry?
You're at 4%.
No.
Oh,
4 pounds additional lean muscle mass.
right.
So
But
my
that's by
weight stayed
taking your,
steady.
yeah.
My weight stayed steady, so I was burning fat,
Yeah.
which translates to, that means, since my weight stayed fairly, I think I only gained
Eating
a half pound.
healthy. Yeah. I mean,
Eating health, like for instance, when we finish here, I'm having a late lunch, and I always joke with my trainer. This is something one thing I can't pass up is a good T-bone steak sale, and some of the grocery stores here actually compete for customers, and it's worked out great. But more importantly, for my emotional stability, for my mental health, to be an example for the community, I had to apply what some of the challenges are being faced. And the entrepreneur that started this business, a lady, she was a girls basketball player back in 2010 when she graduated from high school. A lady's named Sierra Dunner, and she has done an outstanding building this business out of the pandemic, and now expanding it where, helping both men and women, predominantly women, and with the nutrition guidance. And believe me, I needed accountability. I mean, when I
yeah.
was given the feedback, I needed to give up diet sodas. I gave it up.
Mm-hmm.
When I was told, I received mixed messages about, carbohydrates, and because we all remember the food pyramid from the 90s and the 2000s. Well, we all learned that was pretty much debunked because of the over aggressiveness of going after fats. So what did you do? You created a new problem with oils.
Mm-hmm.
So just like California AB5 and the PRO Act, unintended consequences can lead to even tougher results. And that's where I'm glad that, if this, there's an alliance called the MAHA, Make America Healthy Again
Mm-hmm.
Alliance, that's saying, look, we need to deal with our own self health, both
Yeah.
physical and mental. And if this is a means to that end of being an example for the community, then God be praised, because I couldn't have done it without the first
Well,
part
God
of
be
that team.
praised, but also you be praised, because I'm sure you're feeling a lot better.
I am feeling better. I definitely, I'll be turning 60, God willing, after the first of the year, and I'm feeling that I'm going to have a longer life, and God only knows what plans He has for me. I just know they're perfect, as Scripture teaches, and that's what I'm going to do. I will do His will. I just want to do God's will, as Dr. King and many others have said over the years.
So you
Thank you
guys
for letting me bring
know,
that up.
whenever I go over an hour, I had a good guess, because that's for the audio podcast. That's how long we go. So I had a good guess, but I do have to get one last question in, because Ivanoska is in your city. I know
Okay.
we touched on it a bit, but I'm going to say this, like I've said some other things, like if you had a minute, 2 minutes on an elevator, and Ivanoska asked you this, John, what I think she meant is, what is our state doing to get rid of the illegals, again, undocumented, taking over, and how can we as individuals help?
The
Loaded
first
question, I know.
the first step it has to start in DC, because it is federal. It's predominantly federal legislation. The good parts of the Secure the Border Act, and there are a few, not many, good parts of the bipartisan border deal, need to be worked out and made into effective public policy, and to get the votes to pass. Congress. It's likely going to be the next Congress. one side is not better than the other. It needs to be you remember the old diagrams where you diverge and then you have to converge. You need to converge into the effective public policy, ending catch and release,
Yeah.
applying safe zones in foreign countries. And there's actually Democrats in the House that put forward that legislation, not only this Congress, but last Congress. Vicente Gonzalez, he's out of South Texas, safe zones, and that's basically remain in Mexico codified.
Right.
So you need to apply safe zones. Real asylum seekers, you must have more judges in order to judge these cases. You can't be giving
Lots
court
more
dates
judges.
7 or 8 years into the
Lots
future.
more judges.
And you have to be able to, and also the limits of these sanctuary cities laws, I think, have been exceeded. Sadly, there are people, and not just
I don't know anything about that.
and people outside of the United States,
Mhm.
and people inside the United States have been taking advantage of our compassion for far too long.
Mhm.
We need to establish, and no matter who wins on November 5th, no matter who wins control of Congress, each house of Congress, we just need to literally, just like collective bargaining. Collective bargaining is supposed to be good faith negotiation. Everybody has to concede some things. Everybody gets something of what they want. They're not going to get everything, but
Mhm.
they're not going to walk away empty-handed either.
Right.
That's what needs to happen, not only on the PRO Act, but also on immigration reform. A full long-term comprehensive immigration reform is what we need in this country. It's long overdue. Now it's a matter of when we know who's going to be in Washington and in our state capitals where they have some influence, it's time to roll up the sleeves and get to work.
Okay. I guess we have one more elevator I got to squeeze in there because Gogia gets, again, we talked about this in the beginning. So Ron, roll it back to the start, but Ron's a very smart person. He talks about a lot of political topics with me. He
Okay.
has this, and I guess I was going to tell him just to watch the start, but this is a little bit different of a question. So will this mental health issue make people more government dependent? Because Ron, I'm saying this, John, because we even talked about how we need to get rid of all the crap government things that are just created so people can have jobs and do nothing and put it into mental health. But what do you say about this? And that'll be the last one.
Okay, well, in Illinois, I'm going to keep this Illinois centric because I don't know the idiosyncrasies of mental health laws in other states.
Hmm.
Our local mental health boards, that was established back in the Community Mental Health Act of the mid-1960s here in Illinois, based on President Kennedy's community mental health at the federal level. So here in Illinois, we don't want people to be dependent. Now, the state of Illinois has been doing insurance reforms, and something was signed into law by Governor Pritzker earlier this year called the Healthcare Protection Act, because insurance companies were making thank you, by the grace of God. Insurance companies were making decisions, sometimes arbitrary, for instance, of step therapy,
Hmm.
which I just, and many others will call this, that's fail first.
Hmm.
So what are the meds? That should be something that the doctor who knows their patients, where they know if they write a dispense as written, it will be covered under state plans, and some of them are reimbursed through Medicare or Medicaid, but also through private insurance. So no more step therapy is going to be allowed, and I'm not sure when that law fully takes effect. I'm also aware how parents can be concerned about, well, where's the parental involvement when it comes to mental health for their children? For instance, there's legislation that's taken effect 1st of 2025 that's going to say, well, we have to do, we want to have a screening for mental health. You got to keep the parents in the loop too.
Yeah.
They've got to be in the loop. They got to know what's happening. They've got to, before you start giving them any medications, they've got to be in the loop. And because some of this medication, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, just Ozempic, and that's not about mental health, but it's about a growing obesity crisis, which can impact mental health. We got to be as proactive as we can, ask those questions. And that's what I've been doing through my work within the mental health community. Let me just give an example of fruit, real fruit. A little over a year ago, 13 months ago, one of our county neighbors was having a really public fight concerning funding of their mental health board at the county level. It's not my home county, but it's right near to me. So I went into one of their county board committee of the whole meetings. And I suggested, look, you know how you've seen the metaphor of dropping a stone into still waters and the ripples go out?
Mm-hmm.
I was actually dropping a stone into very turbulent waters, but the ripples still got out. I suggested counties have the power under existing law to transition from a property tax based mental health board funded to a sales tax. Counties can do that. Other forms of government, like the townships where I serve, cannot. So look at this, evaluate it, and by the end of 2023, the county board had placed this referendum on the ballot for the primary. And usually referendums like this don't pass during primaries, but this one did. You had this rare case where Democrats and Republicans and independents and mental health care providers were working together.
Mm-hmm.
That is the fruit of the public policy that I want to see reapplied with labor laws, with mental health, and the immigration issue, because it can work. It passed just over 5% of the percentage points in polling, but it did pass in a primary election in March. So what happens there is that the sales tax starts to be collected mid-year on July 1st. The county is going to eliminate the mental health property tax levy because that's what was promised. There's nothing in the referendum that mandates it, but they're doing it because they promised the voters that's what they were going to do. They did the right thing. And I'm not going to say it's completely gave us complete peace, but it's given a lot more peace because he had a more stable funding source that brings in more money than the property tax, and it takes some burden off of property tax owners in this neighboring county.
Right.
That's public policy. That's how I would want to see it. And by the grace of God, may I be able to apply that. One public comment brought this, and I was able to share the day after the primary back in March in my home county saying it passed.
Yeah.
I saw the faces of the board members in my own counties. People don't think that referendum like that going to pass, but just like their executive director for mental health said up there, our board really thought outside the box. We need to do that on other fronts, and that's what we will do by the grace of God.
Yes. I like that. You guys, if I saw nice comments
Thank
about from many people about the weight loss, but also just about, like Helen said, what an incredible guest. So I'm gonna say there's been a big banner right beneath me for a long time. You guys, if you're on Twitter, great. If you're not, you can at least go look at his stuff, but get on it. But a lot of you I know are on Twitter here. Go follow John. John isn't somebody that if you go make a comment, he's not gonna reply. That's the kind of guests I have on here are the kind of guests who, if you go make a comment on one of his tweets, he's going to reply to you. If you message him, if you have a question, this is John. John's a good person. He's going to help you out, or to the best of his ability. I shouldn't overcommit, but
thank you. And definitely lead you to the person that can help you out. It's like I said on a different podcast almost 2 years ago. If this inspires someone else to go change the world, then this has been a great time we've had here.
Right.
And by all means, you do that by talking, by communicating, and let's go change the world. I just had an example about mental health in a neighboring county here in Illinois. There are other fronts and I'm not going to say fights, but other policy challenges that we can work together and solve. Let's do it.
Yeah. John, always a pleasure having you here. But I also want to mention that for a lot of these people who watch this stuff, I think this is why after the fact, the last one caught on too, because you have a way of explaining politics in a way where people are like, wait a minute, for the first time ever, I'm getting this. I don't know how else to put it, dude. Everybody else is trying to, and they do it on purpose, guys. They don't want you to understand it.
What I like to point out, and I did this when I started doing freelance writing a little over 5 years ago, when I got into my more semi-retired, is that we all need to apply discernment. We need to get past the talking points, get past the narratives, get past the platitudes, get past the bromides. Like it's always been done this way.
Yeah.
We got to get to the truth.
Yep.
The truth. Now, granted, a lot of people have their own uh, opinions, which they might think is truth, but we have to discern what that is as well.
Yeah.
It's like, for instance, we talked this about election integrity earlier. I mean, there was one isolated case that was reported out of Georgia about a voter making a mistake. Somebody caught on saying, "Oh, this is widespread voter fraud." No, somebody made a human error, and with the more complex,
Which we talked about earlier too.
yeah,
It happens.
it does happen.
It happens,
Discernment.
guys.
That's one thing I will always say: discernment, discernment. Apply it, practice it. It's taught in Scripture for a good reason because it helps you get to the truth. And yeah, pray on it. If you need divine help, by all means, let that be provided. I know it's worked for me in many fronts, many challenges, and some of the things we talked about with the CFIT training. When I was in some real panic modes, nothing to do with eating or health, but just I'm in a dark place.
Like a soul detox.
Remember your training.
Yeah. Yeah. Like when Luke lets in the first one, when he's got to put that one shot into the hole.
Exactly. Exactly. Like Luke does that there. Or like you'll see
he doesn't need the radar anymore. He's like, I got this.
And
he's
like
been shooting wombats since he was a kid.
I thought it was womp rats, but either way, there. I know. We all and Steve, we both know this, that our friend Kim is also a real science fiction aficionado.
Mm-hmm.
I think she used publicly once that she saw her challenge on the independent contractor front as Cadet James D. Kirk trying to beat the Kobayashi Maru, the no-win scenario. One empty spot of Kim, which was kind of surprising. She shared this openly on Twitter because I mentioned, well, you must be a Doctor Who fan, because I know between her and her son, I don't know who was the bigger nerd, her now adult son, but she didn't know about Doctor Who, which is kind of interesting. So I thought I kind of like the British stuff myself, and they've done some solid things on that recently. There,
that's one of my favorites. I don't care. Like some people I play it for, and they're like, "This is so dumb and cheesy." I'm like, "That's the point."
Well, but yeah, you might remember a year ago, of all the villains to bring back, they brought back the Celestial Toy Maker. Oh my goodness, that was like from a 57-year absence. Obviously, they had to recast. They had Neil Patrick Harris play the Toy Maker, but that was one villain that I always heard over the years they want to see come back, and they finally brought him back for the 60th anniversary of the show.
I think that's
I hear that. I was watching that. I couldn't believe they did that. Some might want to remember that with the races next week. One or the other.
Anything can happen.
Hail Mary. Anything can happen. So on that great note.
Yeah, you guys, thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
John, again, thank you. Thank you, viewers. Thank you, listeners on the audio podcast side. Until next week, be safe, you guys. Earn smart. And I think especially relating to this episode, as we had John on, be good to each other. Have a great week, everybody.